I followed my husband to his business trip. I got shocked by what I saw. I never thought I'd be the kind of person to go through my husband's phone. I used to think that was something only insecure, paranoid people did. People who didn't trust their partners. People who were looking for a reason to start a fight. But trust isn't blind, and sometimes your gut knows the truth before your heart is ready to accept it. Mark and I had been married for 7 years. We had a good life, at least on the surface. We owned a home, took nice vacations, hosted dinner parties where we laughed with friends and played the part of the perfect couple. If anyone had asked, I would have said we were happy. Sure, things had changed over the years. The excitement had faded a little, and we had settled into routine, but that was normal, right? That's just what happens when you build a life with someone. At least, that's what I told myself. But then Mark started acting different. It was little things at first. He started dressing better for work, cologne every morning when he never used to care. He'd linger on his phone a second too long before putting it down when I walked into the room. He started working late more often, and when I asked about it, he'd sigh like I was exhausting him and say something about deadlines, about pressure, about how I didn't understand. I wanted to believe him, I really did. Then came the business trip. He mentioned it casually over dinner one night, said he had a conference out of state, some industry thing he couldn't get out of. A week-long trip, a nice hotel, company expenses covered. I smiled, nodded, pretended it was normal, but something didn't sit right. Maybe it was the way he wouldn't look me in the eye when he said it, or the way he was suddenly checking his phone every 5 minutes like he was waiting for a message. That night, when he fell asleep, I picked up his phone. I didn't even know what I was looking for, but my hands were shaking anyway. It was locked, of course, but I knew his passcode. I hesitated for a second before typing it in, half hoping I was just being ridiculous. But then I saw it. A message thread with a number that didn't have a name. Can't wait to see you. I scrolled up, my stomach twisting tighter with every message. Flirty comments, plans being made, inside jokes I wasn't a part of. And then the worst one. Wish I could wake up next to you instead. I sat there in bed, my husband sleeping peacefully beside me, and realized that everything I had been ignoring, every little suspicion I had brushed off, had been real. Mark wasn't just lying, he was having an affair. I should have been devastated. I should have cried, but I didn't. Instead, I made a plan. Because Mark was about to go on his little business trip, and he wasn't expecting me to show up. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to Mark breathe beside me like nothing had changed. I could feel the weight of it pressing down on my chest, making it hard to even look at him. 7 years of marriage, 7 years of trust, and in the span of a few messages it all crumbled. But I wasn't going to confront him. Not yet. Confrontation meant giving him a chance to lie, to twist things, to gaslight me into thinking I had misunderstood what I had read. I wasn't about to give him that opportunity. Instead, I was going to let him dig his own grave. The next morning, I played my role like nothing was wrong. I kissed him goodbye, told him to have a great trip, and even threw in a joke about bringing me back a souvenir. He laughed, oblivious, and walked out the door with his suitcase. The second he was gone, I got to work. I had taken a screenshot of his messages before he woke up. I didn't recognize the number, but I knew how to find out who it belonged to. A quick search led me to an Instagram account. Private, of course, but the bio had a name, Vanessa. I clicked through the mutual connections and found her profile picture in a group photo with some of Mark's co-workers. That was all I needed. She worked with him. She wasn't some random fling. She was someone he saw every day. I clenched my jaw, trying to push down the anger rising in my chest. This wasn't just some mistake. This wasn't a one-time lapse in judgment. Mark had been carrying on with her right under my nose, and he had been arrogant enough to think I'd never find out. That was about to change. I wasn't going to scream or throw his clothes out onto the lawn. That wasn't my style. If he wanted to play dirty, I'd show him how the game was really played. I booked a flight using the credit card he thought I didn't check. If he was staying in a hotel for this so-called business trip, then so was I. I made sure to arrive a few hours after him, just in case he had any surprises planned. The moment I landed, I checked the hotel confirmation I had pulled from his email, another thing he never thought to hide, room 812. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't crying. I wasn't even nervous. I was just focused, locked in on the goal. I wasn't here to catch him in the act. I already knew what he was doing. I was here to make sure he never saw it coming. I took my time checking into the hotel. No need to rush. Mark thought he was in control. Thought he had me right where he wanted me, waiting at home, none the wiser. He had no idea I was already here, watching his world unravel before he even knew the thread had been pulled. I checked in under my maiden name, something he wouldn't immediately recognize if he glanced at the guest list. The receptionist barely looked at me as she handed over my key. And that was fine. I wasn't here to stand out. I was here to watch. I found a quiet spot in the lobby, my back to a corner where I had a full view of the entrance. Mark hadn't responded to my good luck text from earlier, the one I had sent just to keep up appearances. I imagined he was too busy settling in with Vanessa, playing the role of the devoted boyfriend while his actual wife sat a few floors below, sipping hotel coffee and waiting to burn his world to the ground. An hour passed, then another. I was starting to think maybe I had missed them when I saw them walk in together. Mark. And Vanessa. She was laughing at something he said, her hand grazing his arm like she had every right to touch him. And Mark? He looked happy, comfortable, like he wasn't sneaking around behind his wife's back, like this was just another date with a woman he had no business being with. I clenched my fists beneath the table, forcing myself to breathe through the rage bubbling up inside me. Not yet. Let him have this moment. He won't be smiling for long. I let them go upstairs without making a scene. I wasn't here for a dramatic hotel lobby fight. No, I had something better in mind. I already had a spare key. I had called ahead and told the front desk I was Mark's wife and that I had lost my key. They hadn't even questioned it. I slid the keycard into my pocket, my heart pounding, but not from fear, from satisfaction. He had no idea what was coming. I took my time going upstairs, no need to rush. He was settled in now, probably pouring drinks, laughing with Vanessa about whatever lies he had told her to make himself look good. I wasn't interested in confronting her. She wasn't the one who had promised to love and be faithful to me. Mark was. But that didn't mean she was getting off scot-free. She had known he was married. That made her just as guilty. The elevator ride felt too slow. I tapped my fingers against my thigh, thinking through the next steps. I wasn't here to cry. I wasn't here to beg. I was here to make sure he was the one left broken. When the elevator doors finally slid open, I walked down the hallway, counting the numbers until I reached 812. I didn't hesitate. I slid the keycard in, pushed the door open, and stepped inside. The lights were dim, the faint hum of music playing in the background. I heard movement from the bedroom, voices, low laughter. I could see the edge of a wine glass on the coffee table, the bottle sitting beside it half empty. He had really made himself at home. I let the door click shut behind me. Then I waited, because Mark wasn't expecting me to show up. But when he did, I was going to make damn sure he regretted everything. Mark's face twisted as he scrolled through the email. He wasn't confused. He wasn't in denial. He knew exactly what was happening, and for the first time, he understood that he had lost. He dropped the phone onto the bed like it physically burned him, but there was no escaping it. The evidence was right there in black and white. Divorce papers. The legal complaint citing infidelity. The documentation of every cent he had spent on Vanessa, every receipt, every hotel charge. He had been reckless, sloppy, arrogant enough to believe he would never get caught. Now he was looking at the cost of it. Vanessa still hadn't moved from the bed, her grip on the sheet tightening as she finally processed what I had said. Mark hadn't just cheated, he had brought her into something that could ruin her career too. She worked for his company. Their little fling wasn't just a personal betrayal, it was a violation of company policy, something that HR would be very interested in. I could already see her trying to figure out how much damage this would do to her, whether she could separate herself from the mess he had made. This wasn't supposed to happen like this, Mark muttered under his breath, his voice tight. I let out a sharp laugh. Oh, and how exactly was this supposed to happen? Were you planning to string me along until you got bored? Until I caught you? Or were you just hoping you could live a double life forever? His jaw clenched, but he had nothing to say to that. Vanessa turned to him then, her expression shifting from panic to something colder. She had been looking at me like I was the problem. But now, she was seeing things differently. She was realizing that Mark had been lying to both of us, feeding her whatever story made her feel comfortable with what they were doing. You told me she was crazy, she said suddenly, her voice low. That she was controlling, that she manipulated you into staying married. Mark finally looked at her, but she didn't seem interested in hearing whatever excuse he was about to give. You said she wouldn't let you leave, Vanessa continued, but you never even tried, did you? Mark didn't answer. Vanessa's face twisted in disgust, and she threw the sheets off, grabbing for her clothes. I didn't bother looking away while she dressed. There was no dignity left to preserve here. She yanked her dress on, barely bothering to smooth it down before turning back to him. I can't believe I felt bad for you, she said, shaking her head. You made me feel like I was helping you get out of a miserable marriage, like I was doing you a favor. I almost felt bad for her, almost. But she had known he was married. She had chosen to be here. She wasn't innocent, no matter how badly she wanted to convince herself she had been tricked. She turned to me next, shifting uncomfortably. Look, I really didn't know it was like this. I shrugged. Doesn't change anything. She swallowed whatever response she had been about to give, grabbed her purse, and walked out. The door clicked shut behind her, leaving only silence in her wake. I turned back to Mark. He was staring at the papers on his phone, his shoulders rigid, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "This is extreme," he said finally, his voice tight. "You didn't even give me a chance to explain." I shook my head. "I don't need an explanation. I need a signature." His eyes flicked back to the screen, reading through the terms. He looked for a loophole, some way out, but there wasn't one. I had done my homework. The prenup worked in my favor, but his infidelity had secured everything else. The house? Mine. The joint accounts? Already separated. His retirement fund? Well, let's just say the court wouldn't be kind to him after I was done. He had wanted to avoid a messy divorce, and now he was getting the worst-case scenario. "You want me to just sign my life away?" he scoffed. "You already did that the second you walked into this hotel with her," I said. "I'm just making it official." He let out a slow breath, staring at the screen, his jaw tightening. I could see the war happening in his head, the anger, the regret, the realization that he had played this game and lost. "You're enjoying this," he muttered. "Not really," I admitted. "I would have preferred a husband who didn't cheat." He didn't have a response to that. I reached into my bag and pulled out a printed copy of the papers, setting them on the desk beside him. "I'll be at the lawyer's office tomorrow at 9, I said. "You can sign it now or in court, but either way this is happening." I didn't wait for his answer. I didn't care what he did next. I had everything I needed. The moment I walked out of that hotel room, I was done. Mark signed the papers the next morning. I got the confirmation from my lawyer before I even had my first coffee of the day. There was no note attached, no last-minute plea, just his signature on the documents that officially ended our marriage. I stared at the email for a long time, not because I had second thoughts, but because it felt surreal. 7 years of marriage, reduced to a few legal documents. No big fight, no dramatic courtroom battle, just a clean break. I had expected him to drag it out, to argue, to make it more difficult, just for the sake of control, but maybe even he knew there was no point. I had stripped him of any leverage he thought he had, the moment I walked into that hotel room, the moment I let him hear his own words played back to him. He lost. There was no spinning it, no lying his way out. It was done. I closed my laptop and went about my day like it was any other. I didn't cry. I didn't feel empty. There was no overwhelming sadness. The grief had passed the night I found his messages. I had already mourned what I thought our marriage was. What was left to feel? Relief, maybe? Not happiness, not yet, but something close to it. A few days later, I heard through a mutual friend that Mark wasn't handling things as well as he had expected. He was still at the company, but the promotion he had been banking on suddenly wasn't a sure thing anymore. Vanessa had distanced herself quickly, making it clear she wanted nothing to do with him now that his life was in shambles. She had transferred to a different department, and the rumor was that she was already seeing someone else. Mark had torched his marriage for nothing. He must have realized how badly he had screwed up because one night, a full week after signing the papers, he texted me, "Mark, we should talk." I stared at the message for a few seconds before deleting it. Whatever he had to say wasn't my concern anymore. A few hours later, another message came through. "Mark, I just need to explain." There was nothing left to explain. I deleted that one too. By the next morning, he had stopped trying. Maybe he finally understood that there was no fixing this. The weeks that followed felt strange at first. My routines were the same, but my life had completely changed. No more checking my phone, wondering where he was. No more waiting for the other shoe to drop. The silence in my home was peaceful. There was no tension, no anxiety, just me, on my own for the first time in years. A few people tried to push for some kind of closure. Mutual friends, people who thought I should at least meet with Mark one last time to clear the air. I didn't see the point. What would I gain from listening to his excuses? He had already shown me the truth when he thought I wasn't looking. The last thing I ever heard about him was that he had been quietly pushed out of his job. He wasn't fired outright, but his reputation was damaged, and the company had started phasing him out. Without the promotion, he had no reason to stay. He ended up leaving on his own, trying to start over somewhere new. I never found out where he went. I never asked. I moved on. It took time, but it wasn't as hard as I thought it would be. Mark had spent months thinking he was in control, that he could lie to me, betray me, and still keep his life intact. But in the end, I was the one who walked away. And he was the one left with nothing.